Andrea Harris, welcome to the podcast, the DCQ podcast Special Sits. Really great to have you on. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm fine. So where exactly are you, joining us from today?
I'm joining you from my home office / spare room in my house in Guernsey.
In Guernsey. So Guernsey, Channel Islands. You're actually the first, offshore practitioner in Special Sits on the podcast. And I'm hoping that, during the conversation today, we can maybe try to demystify some things about offshore and maybe compare it to onshore in Special Sits.
Sure.
But maybe before we do that, let's maybe start at the beginning and the beginning of your journey, which, I understand leads us to Australia because that's where you grew up and that's where you started practice. So maybe you can give us, a sense of, how that was and how, when and why you actually pursued a career that, led you into the Special Sits space.
Sure. When I was at school, I very much enjoyed studying sciences, but I wasn't very good at them. So my sort of ideas of becoming perhaps a doctor or something in the sort of health specialist field was shot down relatively quickly in my high school career. So I was born in Adelaide, went to school in Adelaide and lived in Adelaide for all my life until I moved away, which I'll come to shortly. So I did some business subjects at school, which I really seemed to enjoy. The numbers side of things I quite enjoyed. And so when I did my final year of schooling and I scored quite highly in those subjects, it motivated me to apply to university for a degree, which was a Bachelor of Commerce with an accounting major. And so I pursued my university studies and I was in my final year of university and I very much didn't enjoy audit. I didn't enjoy tax. And I was wondering, what am I going to do with this qualification when I finish university? And I went to a sort of an open evening where all the employers come along and tell you about what they do. And then, ahead of, applying for their graduate intake. And one person that I spoke to was from a firm that did liquidation and insolvency work. And chatting to them, I was quite interested in what they were talking about. So I applied for a job with them and along with many other jobs that I applied for. And I was lucky enough to get one at what was then Ferrier Hodgson and now KPMG in Adelaide. So
and yeah, interestingly enough, somebody else who was earlier on the podcast, Peter Goddard, he started his career right there as well, in that shop. But he did it, I think, in Sydney, and you did it in Adelaide.
Yes.
So maybe for those who are unfamiliar with Adelaide, that that's one of the major cities in Australia, and it's also a business city like I guess Sydney, Melbourne, maybe the more sort of common places that people know.
Yes, I mean, I think whenever I speak to people, oh, you're from Australia, I've been to Melbourne or I've been to Sydney, and not a lot of people have been to Adelaide, but it is a capital city. I think the population now is about 1.3 or 1.4 million. So it's a decent sized city. And yes, there is quite a lot of industry there. There's some great wine regions around Adelaide, and there is a lot of work around the wine industry there, which is probably one of the major drivers, and obviously tourism and farming and that sort of a thing as well. So yeah.
And is your decision to do, I guess, accounting, or at least accounting in a shop that actually focuses on insolvency liquidations, was that something that you decided all by yourself, or was there influence maybe from your parents? Is there maybe in the family people that have done this and you sort of saw that and thought maybe that is of interest, or are you sort of the trailblazer in that space within the family?
It's funny you ask, Peter, because my dad was an accountant, and I spent a lot of my childhood saying I didn't want to do what Dad did. But he was involved in the aged care industry and worked most of his career in that space. So he was more sort of CEO and MD and financial controller of aged care businesses. So I've ended up with, the same qualifications as my dad, but in a very different field. And it's not something that anybody in my family has sort of worked in before. And I really knew nothing about until I found out about the opportunity to work in a firm like that. I think even in my university studies, there may have been one lecture that talked about insolvency and restructuring. And I think that has changed now. I think a lot of curriculums have developed further to have more specialities at university around insolvency restructuring work. But it wasn't very well covered, I think, when I studied. So I didn't really know much about what I was getting myself into.
But it was a business study that you did, right? Business study. And obviously, as we know very well, financial distress is part of the life cycle of a business. So, you'd imagine that if you study business, you also have a little bit of focus on that. But funnily enough, it isn't. Maybe that has changed indeed. But it's one of the things that, I guess we also see in practice is that financial distress is not something that anybody in business wants to focus on necessarily if they don't have to, right?
Exactly.
Denial is there, but again, it starts already with the studies. It's not a focus. Hopefully that has changed, since you started and where we are now. And Ferrier Hodgson, that was a specialized firm only doing, I guess, financial distress, insolvency liquidations. And maybe at that time when you started, that was the primary focus, or was it, more varied than that?
Yeah, no, it was a specific insolvency and liquidation restructuring firm. They also did some forensic accounting as well from the digital side, as well as digital forensics, as well as forensic accounting work. So, and some personal bankruptcy as well. So when I was working there, I probably did about a 50-50 split of corporate and personal bankruptcy.
Okay. And was it still a relatively small firm then? Because I understand from, the conversation that I had with Peter that it did grow, quite a bit. And that it started in Melbourne, but then it became, bigger and also cross-border. Was your practice, very local, regional, national, or was it also, cross-border?
Yeah, at the time, I think it was very much localized to Adelaide and country South Australia. We did some work in relation to like a pine plantation and a timber sawmill, which was out in the countryside. There was a potato processing plant that turned potatoes into frozen chips. And there was some work that would cross state borders in Australia. But for me in my career working in Adelaide, I didn't never do anything international at that point.
But you had an interest across the border, or at least, at a certain point in time, that was probably why you made the decision to become an offshore practitioner. How did that come about?
I got an email one day from a recruitment firm saying, we have a company in the Cayman Islands that would love to talk to you about working for them. And I thought it was spam or phishing. But then a few days later, I thought, well, actually, there's nothing to lose from sending a response to that email to see what happens. And I did a bit of looking at who had sent me the email, and they looked like a bona fide person. So I then spoke to this recruiter who told me about a firm in the Cayman Islands called Krys Global. And they, again, were a specialist insolvency and restructuring forensics firm that were looking for somebody like me to go and work with them. So after a couple of interviews and phone conversations, because back then it wasn't video chat, that was still sort of the late noughties, I accepted a position with Krys Global. So I packed up my life and left Adelaide and moved to the Caribbean.
And when was that exactly?
That was, it's actually almost 15 years ago. It was in November 2010.
So at that point in time, the world had changed already, quite a bit in our space, right?
Yes.
Because we had the great financial crisis that had occurred globally. And, in many professions, if you weren't involved in restructuring, all of a sudden you were, involved in restructuring. Leading up to that, what was the practice at Ferrier Hodgson, and was it something that, how did the global financial crisis impact, your practice and maybe also your ambitions going forward to actually seriously considering an opportunity like that?
Yeah. It is sometimes hard looking back, because that was really relatively early in my career, and I was probably just, head down, working hard. And I think looking back, there was definitely an increase in our work around receiverships, with banks appointing us to take control of assets of companies. And I know that there was a lot of impact, obviously globally, in respect of a number of different investment funds, and one of those ones, was Fairfield Century, being the biggest feeder fund into the Madoff fraud. So what ended up happening working at Krys Global was that I ended up working on the Madoff fraud via Fairfield, essentially. And I think I didn't know it at the time when I made the decision to move to the Caribbean, but looking back now, the difference in the work between the onshore, perhaps trading businesses, and day-to-day operation and management when we get appointed, and assessing, is there a viable business to sell? Is there something to salvage here, and trying to perhaps package a business for sale or assets for sale? The work involved in investment funds and what's happened with them and caused their failure is on such a much larger scale, which just, I think, adds to the interest of doing the offshore work and the investment funds.
So, yeah, offshore, I think for some, it still is, a sunny place for shady people. And I mean, it has that reputation probably, with the man and woman in the street. In our space, special sits, and you sort of, came with, I guess, a prime example. Madoff is, a Ponzi scheme, huge Ponzi scheme with huge consequences, and it was fraud, right? And it resulted in lots of work offshore. Is that reputation justified? And how were things when you actually moved there? Because I think it also links to something else that I'm very interested in, is why is it that our, special sit space and financial distress still has such an enormous negative stigma to it? And one reason is maybe just because of these large fraud cases that people just associate with financial distress. And that's what the media picks up on. And that's why everybody believes financial distress is, criminals, fraudsters. But okay, that is the case in certain situations, but clearly not in all. But is it the case in all situations offshore?
Absolutely not. And I think, I definitely think, even in the 15 years that I have worked offshore, there has been an incredible revolution in respect of regulation. And I would say that in some of these offshore jurisdictions now, it's harder to run a day-to-day business that's regulated than it could be in some onshore jurisdictions these days. There's a number of assessments that go on by the Financial Action Task Force, by Moneyval, that come to our jurisdictions and assess our regulatory regime. And I think, for a lot of the places like Cayman and, Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man, there's been some inspections in recent years that have generally given quite good reports on the regulatory environment in these countries. So I think as a result of those big frauds, such as a Madoff, such as Sphinx, such as other things that have happened over the years, there's been a real tightening of regulatory requirements, which means it is harder and more difficult for people to first commit and perpetrate such frauds, but then also to be able to get away with it.
So you think that maybe the mentality has changed globally about this, or do you think, and maybe a reason for that is the cases that actually, the fraud cases that came about, because the main reason, sunshine is maybe one reason, but the other is low taxes, right? Low of little taxes, and maybe indeed also not that much supervision. So those were the attractions to go offshore. What would you think? If you talk about offshore, what would you consider offshore for purposes of special sits?
I mean, I fully appreciate and agree that historically the negative connotations with the offshore world have been there, but the days of people arriving in the airport in Grand Cayman with a suitcase full of cash, that's very long gone, but that's still a stigma that is associated with somewhere like Cayman. And I think the term offshore, to me, it's because we're not part of a mainland country. It's not anything to do with shadiness or anything like that. We're generally small. We are small island countries. So we're offshore from the mainland. That's how I kind of see it.
Well, the UK is offshore too, as is Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's
it.
very true. But they don't have a population of 60,000 people or 100,000 people.
No, that's right, a little bit more.
And I do think, like I say, I think they have come a long way, even in the time that I've lived overseas and offshore. That the reporting and the regulatory requirements are just so much more of a high level that there should be a bit more credibility given to some of these jurisdictions now than perhaps has historically been given.
Yeah. So the step for you from leaving Australia, where you had a practice that was regional and maybe national to a certain extent, you go offshore. What changed? It became a lot more international, because I assume because everything was international there.
Of course, so your structures that perhaps we get appointed over in Cayman, Guernsey, British Virgin Islands, it's usually like a holding company for a bigger structure. So on the one hand, your shareholders or investors are usually based globally. And then on the other hand, your assets and your creditors are also generally based globally as well. So instead of, for example, being appointed over a kitchen manufacturer in Adelaide, where I get in my car and I drive down to the factory to meet with the staff and to count stock and to, run the business, I'm now dealing with investment funds, which is a very different beast to a trading business, with institutional shareholders located all over the world, with assets that perhaps I don't even know where they are, and need to sort of devise a strategy for locating them. So it was still using the same principles, obviously. I think, most of the Commonwealth countries around the world have very similar principles around insolvency, and the laws are also quite similar. So I think the the theoretical side of things for me didn't change too much because the concepts were the same, but the practicalities of it did change, and the actual type of work was quite different.
And it was an easy transition to, get qualified there. As you say, it's based on sort of similar principles. So for you to actually, migrate to Cayman and then basically, be able to be appointed there was fairly straightforward.
Yeah. I didn't start taking appointments in my career until I moved to Guernsey. But yeah, the requirements around appointments. I know in Australia there is there's some strict rules. It's similar to the UK where there's a certain level of qualification required, and there's certain criteria that needs to be met, perhaps a certain amount of hours that need to be worked, and that sort of a thing. I know Cayman has some similar rules around sort of your qualification and your membership body being of a certain standard. So, for example, the ICAEW or equivalent in a Commonwealth jurisdiction. So there is some flexibility, I think, in the offshore world, because it is quite transient for some people. Some people may spend a few years in one jurisdiction and then, move on to another one. And if you had to per se requalify every time, I think it would be quite difficult. But like I say, the common principles are all the same. And in a lot of the offshore jurisdictions, it's about being able to demonstrate to the court to be appointed that you have that experience and that you're able to take on appointments. So that's what happened when I moved on to the Channel Islands in due course.
And so you were in Cayman, is probably one of the most well-known, I guess, offshore places. But you decided to move on to, Guernsey. What was behind that? Less sunshine there, for sure.
Less sunshine, but it does have its positives. So Krys Global decided that they wanted to open an office in Guernsey as their next location. And Timothy Lecornu, who a lot of people will be familiar with in the industry, he's another INSOL Fellow as well. He was the director that I was doing all of my work with in Cayman, and he had been asked to move to Guernsey to set up the office. And he asked me if I would go with him. And he thought that we could make a real go of moving to Guernsey and setting up a new office there. So I Googled Guernsey because I didn't know where it was. I'd never heard of it. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. It's not too far from the UK. It's quite close to Europe. That might be a bit of fun. And also it was an incredible opportunity to essentially do a startup type business, but I didn't have to invest any money myself. It was just my job. If it didn't work out, then I could move elsewhere. I could move back to Australia. I saw a lot of upside and opportunity, and with a bit of downside, but the upside far outweighed the down. So made the decision to move over, and it was 13 years last week since I arrived in
Wow.
Guernsey. So it's a common story for many people that move to offshore countries. I thought it'd be a 2 or 3 year thing, and then maybe I'd move somewhere else. Maybe I'd move back to Australia. But yeah, Guernsey just fits with me, and I love it here. So that's clearly why I've stayed for so long.
And how does it compare then to the Caymans? Two offshore jurisdictions, but quite different, I would think.
I mean, my time in Cayman, a lot of our work was court driven. A lot of the appointments that we took were of a contentious nature, and were court appointed with some residual work that would be voluntary solvent liquidation type work. In Guernsey, there's a lot less court appointed work, and there's a very high volume of voluntary appointed work. But the difference here is that a voluntary non-court appointment can happen for insolvent companies as well as solvent companies, which is not a mechanism available in some jurisdictions. So I think from a cost perspective, if a company needs to go into liquidation and the shareholders, understand that that's what needs to happen and there's no sort of argument about that, then they will pass the resolutions to appoint the liquidators, minimizing costs with having to go to court and having to make the application to put the company into liquidation. So, the court appointed volume of cases in the Channel Islands is a lot less than what I saw in the Caribbean and what I still understand it to be in the Caribbean. But I think that's a function of the slightly different law regime.
Yeah. And so the Caribbean, is it fair to say that they're more US focused and then the Channel Islands are more UK focused, or is it actually in both UK and US and basically the world, or is there a delineation of certain of the offshore jurisdictions are primarily focused on, some are focused on China and Hong Kong, others are focused on the US and the others are focused on Europe. How does it sort of fit?
I see a lot of nexus between the Caribbean jurisdictions and the US, 100%. There is also still a lot of nexus between the Caribbean and China and Hong Kong. And then in the Channel Islands, we very rarely will have anything that has a US focus or tangent to it. As you say, a lot of it is more sort of UK and European focused. Traditionally, there's been a lot of vehicles in the Channel Islands that have Russian beneficiaries or Russian ownership in their structure. And so that's obviously had its own challenges in the past few years. But then also more recurring, I'm seeing in more recent times, is the connection with the Middle East and the Channel Islands. And I don't know myself whether that's sort of a global phenomenon, whether the UAE presence or connection is happening a lot more globally, but definitely we're seeing a lot more of that in the Channel Islands at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I guess, the Middle East being in London, the Russians being in London, seems to be maybe the stepping stone for using the Channel Islands as well, right? And if they're leaving again, then maybe that has an impact on the Channel Islands as well. Is there anything other than geographical, I guess, closeness? Is there anything specific in the Channel Islands that is, attractive over and above, what is offered in the Caribbean, or is it, as I said, the fact that it's just closer by?
Yeah, I find it hard to point to any one particular sort of reason why that would be more attractive in the Channel Islands and the Caribbean as an example. But historically, Guernsey as a jurisdiction has quite a high volume of investment funds registered here. And then Jersey, our sister island across the way, they've traditionally had a lot more sort of trust structures and property unit trusts in their jurisdictions. So a lot of what we consult on and look at on a day-to-day basis in Guernsey is funds, and to an extent in Jersey there are funds over there as well. But a lot of what we look at in Jersey is unit trust structures. And across both islands, the GP, LP structure set up as well. So I think, different jurisdictions do have perhaps certain advantages in, the structures that are available to people that want to hold their assets in a certain way.
Yeah.
But I think, you mentioned the tax point before, and that's obviously definitely a matter that people consider when they're planning how their structures will be set up. But again, coming back to one of the points you made at the start, people aren't necessarily thinking about what happens if the tap turns off or the money runs out until it's a bit too late.
Yeah. And is that something that you maybe see going forward being a way to differentiate various offshore jurisdictions, is how their insolvency regimes actually have modernized? Because I guess, globally, and maybe, the US and the UK being the front runners in it, the aim is to be more of a rescue culture as opposed to, criminalizing everything and liquidating things. Is that something, that maybe over your career you've seen develop in that way? And have you seen it also in, offshore, or is offshore maybe lacking behind a little bit? And if offshore is lacking behind, is that maybe because the cases are, focused on the bigger frauds where there's not much to rescue, but it is very much to sort of, get as big a recovery for the victims of the fraud?
Yeah. I mean, I think you got to remember at the end of the day that as insolvency practitioners, we've got this age-old reputation for being, the Grim Reaper, or, the Undertaker.
The Undertaker, exactly.
That comes in and deals with whatever's left and takes all the money that's left in their fees. And, we've got this historical reputation of being, not corporate baddies in a way, but not ever, doing positive things. I think people just see us as an expense that takes away from any money that they may get as a return. But I think one of the things that I think as a profession, we've been trying to work on, and we need to continue to work on, is changing that perception of our role from Undertaker or the Grim Reaper to, your friendly advisory consultant. Like we're in the past, those matters that get sensationalized, or even now, the matters that get sensationalized are the matters that have caused massive loss. They don't publicize matters where we've managed to perhaps it's a solvent situation where we've been able to utilize our skills and the appointment as liquidators to actually return money to investors in a tax efficient way. People don't publish news articles about that because it's not interesting, and it's not sort of, something that's going to grab people's attention. And I think trying to educate the general public around the fact that we're not just coming in and taking what's left in fees and leaving everybody out to dry, but that we're coming in and we're doing a service whereby we are investigating what possible avenues there might be for potential recovery for victims of fraud, or people that have been a victim of a Ponzi scheme, or trying to show people that we're adding value, and educating them to understand that, rather than seeing us coming in and raping and pillaging whatever might be left. And I think that that's really important and key to our profession going forwards. There's always been that negative connotation with the word insolvency, and we're insolvency practitioners. So by the very nature of my job, I always seem to have a negative connotation about it. But it doesn't need to be that way. And I think if we can somehow educate the public better about that, then we might be viewed better. And I think as well, one thing that I've definitely seen develop in my career and change over time is, directors are getting better and are better at, looking to take advice before the proverbial hits the fan, right? They're actually contacting people like us to have conversations before the scales have tipped in the other direction. And I think that that's also helping change the culture around, the stigma of our profession, because, they're more proactive, which means that we can help before things are too far gone, and get a rescue sorted out, get a pre-pack situation sorted whereby you can preserve the value of the business and carry it on whereby dealing with creditors. So yeah, I think that there's a few changes there that I've seen, but still some more work that needs to be done in shaping how our profession is viewed.
And so if you need to explain to, people that are not insiders in the special sits space, how would you explain, what it is that you're doing then?
I guess, if you've got a problem with your tap, you'll call your plumber, right?
Yeah.
And I think if people have got problems with their finances or issues around funding or going concern issues or concerns that, if that develops, then something's going to be become quite an issue for a particular business or fund or whatever it might be. We're the specialists in that area. We're the proverbial plumber for the tap, right?
Yeah.
So, I'd like to think that we're the people that you can talk to analyze what's going on and take that independent view of a problem or a potential problem, because I think a lot of, management and directors are, these businesses are their babies, or it's been theirs from inception, and they're so close to the detail sometimes that it really needs someone independent to come in and stress test some of the assumptions that they're making, to, kick the tires to see whether, what they think is correct, or actually give them some new ideas about how to look at things.
Yeah. So, the plumber, if you do DIY yourself, sometimes you make it worse. And then, there's there's more to fix when the plumber finally comes in.
Like,
I can
exactly.
see that. And the other thing is, you're saying people being close to the business because it's their baby, or maybe it's a family business, and then financial distress has a lot to do with, I guess, losing faith, but maybe feeling that your failure, embarrassment, all these things are sort of associated with financial distress.
Hmm.
I think if we're moving more towards a situation where there is, professionals that are doing this, then maybe it becomes a lot less emotive, and people can just, from a business perspective, look at the facts and see what it is that needs to be done. And again, that is what, IPs and, people in the special sits space provide, right? They can look at it as a business and, obviously understand the pressures that are there. But there are solutions if you come early enough so that we can actually assess what's going on.
Hmm.
I think the other thing that you're saying, and maybe this is something that should be emphasized, is if there is a fraud, you actually focus on asset recovery, asset tracing, and there are all kinds of sophisticated tools to do that. And I think that is something that I always feel that, offshore practitioners are a lot more focused on, out of necessity, because as you say, you're not driving up to the shoe manufacturer's business. No, all the assets are somewhere else. You need to figure out where they are. What are sort of the things on asset tracing and asset recovery that are worthwhile sort of mentioning as tools that are there that people may not actually be aware of?
Yeah, I think, that's probably one of the biggest challenges we face. Whether you're onshore or offshore, it can be quite difficult to locate assets. And obviously, if there's cash coming in and out of a company, fund, business, starting point a lot of the time is your bank statements and the transactions that are happening. And there's some amazing tools available now. We're in 2025, and there's some great software and some great AI tools that are available to be able to help process and start, assist with analyzing some of that information to then put it into a format which might help with sort of tracing assets. I think one of the biggest tools that I used a lot previously, or previously in recent years, and probably throughout my offshore career, has been 1782 applications to be able to get transaction information in relation to any US dollar transactions. So that's a really useful tool that we've used in the past to be able to help with sort of cash tracing and where funds flow is occurring in US dollars. And then, there's some really good, publicly available information sites where we can do some searching. We've got some great tools across our network of Grant Thornton professionals and some people that specifically operate in that area, and they've got some some databases which have been compiled over the years from a number of different sources, which make it quite helpful to be able to sort of start tracing ownership of physical assets as well. So, there's a number of different tools available, and I think as a practitioner, we need to have a wide perspective in how to go about approaching some of these things. Because if it's like, well, this is the way I did it last time, so this is how I'm doing it now, I don't ever think that's a great approach for us to take, because every company we get appointed over and every situation we face is very different.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the aspects of our profession, is that, it's tailor-made solutions that are usually required for, the situation. So there are precedents, but, they're not always copy-paste the same thing. You're making a good point. We've sort of, have the story up to Krys Global, but then at a certain point in time, you had the opportunity to join Grant Thornton, and you're, at present a partner in Grant Thornton. How did that happen? That was, and you remained in Guernsey, right?
Yes. So it's a little bit ironic, is probably the best word, because the reason Krys Global saw an opportunity to open in Guernsey was because we could see that Grant Thornton was getting all of the work in this space. So one of the main drivers for Tim and I to move here was to challenge that and to provide an alternative to Grant Thornton. So yeah, I think it was early 2020, and I was approached by my now co-partner, Ben, and he sort of said that Grant Thornton was looking at sort of succession planning and thinking about what would happen when one of their existing partners would retire, because he's starting to think about those plans. And would I be interested in discussing moving to Grant Thornton? And so that was a really nice approach. And I thought, well, there's similar to when I had the opportunity with Krys Global. I thought, well, there's nothing to lose from having a conversation and exploring this a bit further. And then we all know what happened in, early 2020. COVID set in, and the world shut down. So it was sort of shelved for a while we respectively, worked with our own firms and carried on. And then we picked up discussions later in the year, and yeah, it was a great opportunity presented to me around, working at a bigger firm. Ferrier's was always specific. Krys Global was also specific, but I had this opportunity to now work in a firm which also provides audit services and tax services and other business advisory services, such as valuations and payroll and management accounts to clients. And I just thought, actually, that sounds like a really interesting opportunity. And, there were some really great things about working in a small organization like Krys Global. It really, definitely propelled my career forward and probably advanced me in certain ways quicker than perhaps if I had been at a larger firm. But then I also was enticed and excited by the opportunity at Grant Thornton to work with a bigger team, and not just a bigger business, but, the recovery and reorganization team at Grant Thornton was quite a lot bigger than what I was working with at Krys. So I made the decision to move, and it's nearly 5 years since I made the move. So
Time flies.
It really does. The fact that I've been out of Australia for nearly 15 years, that's the thing that blows my mind the most. Like I've been away twice as long as what I even worked in Australia. So
are you still feeling very much, an Aussie, or are you, becoming more, I guess, a citizen of the world because you've been around and been in a very international setting?
Yeah, I think it's probably something that resonates with anybody, and probably even yourself, Peter, because I know that
Absolutely.
You're in a similar position. But Australia will always be my home. Adelaide will always be home. That's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. That's where I have so many family memories, and still have my family. My dad and my sister and her husband and their children are all still in Adelaide. So it's always a place I go back to. And there's parts about it that I miss, but I don't think it's the place that I miss. I think it's the people that I miss.
Yeah.
And I just feel really privileged to have two homes, because Guernsey is definitely my home too. I have a flat here. I have a number of people that I call my Guernsey family here. Of a lovely support network of people here, as well as back in Adelaide. So I feel, one of the privileged minority probably that can have more than one home.
Excellent. Yeah, look, very much the same for me. I've said it that, for me, 25 years outside of, the Netherlands. I came in 2000 to this country, and actually earlier this year, I bit the bullet and became a British citizen. So, that's sort of, my adopted new home, and probably the closest to, a citizen of the world that you can be. If you're around London, it doesn't get more, international than that. And it's very special. So, very much, with you on that. One thing that I'm interested in as well, in particular, is when I started 30 years ago, it was very much a profession where, it was sort of dominated by white old man. And, guess what? I've started to become one, close to it. But things have changed in the last 30 years as well. I'll be interested to know from you, as a woman in, a profession that was historically very male dominated in a certain way. How has, that been for you? Have there been obstacles along the way that you sort of had to overcome? Things have changed. What has changed? And, you're obviously an example of somebody, who's trailblazed in a number of things, and more to come, right? I mean, you're not yet done in any way, shape, or form. You're in the middle of a lot of things. Be interested to know, what the journey has been there, and whether, there are lessons learned from that.
Yeah. I mean, when I started at Ferrier Hodgson, there were two other females professionals. Every other person that was a female in the business was support staff. So, cashier, receptionist, that sort of a thing. And so, yes, very male dominated workplace. And, I think to an extent, on the whole, the profession probably still is more males than females. But what pleases me so much is to see that has changed so much in my time, in my 22, 23 years of working in this space. I think the way that life has also evolved has also assisted in that. I think that, the traditional expectation around women stay at home and raise children and men go to work and earn the money, that's just, that's blown out of the water these days. That's just not how life is anymore. Whereas 25 years ago, that was probably still quite relevant to people. So the evolution of society also has helped change that imbalance in our profession. But I also think, there have been some really good things around, trying to encourage more women to get into our space. And I think insolvency and restructuring takes a certain type of person. It's not just whether about it's male or female. It's also not every man would be able to be an insolvency practitioner, and not every woman is made to stay at home and raise children.
No.
So I think there's, the active work by organisations such as IWIRC, for example, trying to help really, support and elevate women in our profession.
So the International Women in Insolvency and Restructuring Confederation, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Sorry. We talk so much in acronyms, sometimes we forget that people might not know what they are. But that organisation is by no means something that tries to suppress men to push women forward. It's very much just about trying to support women and give them that additional support. At the end of the day, if people want to have families, a woman has to take time out of her career to have children. That's just biology. That's that's what happens.
Yeah.
And so to be able to be more flexible nowadays around what that might look like for a return to work for someone that's had time off having a baby, or even if it's someone that's had a long-term illness and had some time out of the profession, or even, stepped away for whatever reason it might be and coming back into the profession. That support, I think, has gotten a lot better than perhaps what it used to be to help get women back in. And I definitely see, in the sort of middle to low level in our profession, I see 50-50 in a lot of workplaces. Sometimes I see that there might even be more women than men, but we just got to keep working on how
There's still a glass ceiling at the top, you believe. Yeah.
to an extent, because of the fact that women who choose to have children and need to take time out of the profession are essentially hamstrung in a way. And that is something that is really difficult to navigate because it's a biological thing. It can't change. We can't just say, well, actually, the male is going to have the child this time around, so I can continue working through my career. So it's, it's a difficult one to navigate, but I do think it's come forward in leaps and bounds since I first started. And, I get so much excitement out of, attending conferences and events where I see so many women present as representatives of senior people within our businesses.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I saw that, made me smile, I didn't actually know this, but you're also a trailblazer outside of the profession in rugby, right? where you're a first in many things as well. Maybe tell us a little bit about, the Guernsey Raiders, the fact that you actually also, play, I don't know if you're still playing rugby, but you were the first, I guess, vice president, the first president, the first chair of the rugby club. You retired, or you sort of, said goodbye for that function last year. But you've been, very much into, I guess, a space where, there's a lot of men too. I mean, more women are doing it as well, but, that's real trailblazing.
Yeah. When I moved to Guernsey, I knew nothing about rugby. I grew up.
You're from Australia. They
I
should
know,
know.
but Adelaide, Peter, is an AFL city. It's an Aussie rules city. There's
Right. Okay.
there's not really any rugby union there. So I grew up with AFL, and I'm
Yep.
still a very avid AFL supporter. But yeah, when I moved to Guernsey, I became friends with a girl. She's the first friend I made in Guernsey, and she played rugby with the women.
Yep.
And she kept trying to encourage me to go down and play, and I protested profusely. Oh no, I play netball and tennis. I don't do contact sport. That's a stupid idea. And then a few things had happened, and I thought, you know what? I need a new hobby. I need to try something different. And so I thought, I'll finally give in and I'll go down to training. And, if I hate it, I don't ever have to go again. What's the worst that can happen? And yeah, then fast forward 10 years of playing and being involved on the committee and being, vice chair, joint chair. I'm a president. It's been a journey and it's been wonderful. Like, I genuinely think if I didn't take up rugby, I probably wouldn't still be in Guernsey. So
Wow. So it is. I mean, to me, a different experience, but similar in that, from the Netherlands, I didn't know anything about rugby, but have two boys, and both boys, really played rugby at a high level, both at academy level. So I was sort of introduced to the sport, never having played it myself. But I really, really am a convert from like football into rugby. I really like the sport, and it has so much in it. Obviously, the contact, people need to get used to that. But actually, it is also, it bonds teams a lot more. And what I really like about it is that there's a place for everybody, right? You need the fast guys, you need the small guys, you need the big guys, you need the tall guys. All of them have a role to play, and it's one unit, much more so than a football team. in life, I guess, there's a lot that you can learn from a rugby team. And I wonder to what extent do you think that, your experience with rugby, playing it, but also, being heavily involved in the club itself, are there sort of things you've picked up from that that you can also apply in your professional life?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think something that's common between, professional life and what I was involved in with the rugby club is, managing people's expectations is extremely important. Whether it be a shareholder, a creditor, a service provider, the opposition team that's flying over from the UK to visit, there needs to be communication and managing expectations in a very clear way, because if you're not clear on those expectations, you may end up letting people down without knowing it. There may be a miscommunication whereby that ends up resulting in something detrimental to someone involved. And so I think, setting expectations and communicating clearly are two things that are transferable really across anything, whether it be personal, professional, or sporting life. I think as well, coming back to one of the points I made earlier, like, just because something's always worked one way doesn't mean it should stay the same or that it shouldn't change. But then also, change in some situations can be quite frustrating and slow, perhaps when you want things to move a bit quicker. But, again, the communication piece is important, because if you can explain to people why that change is necessary or what benefits will come out of that change, then people are much more receptive to that.
Yeah. And if you look at your, journey in your career, how much do you think that, your profession has actually, formed you the way you are right now? Because as you said, there are jobs that are much more, sort of 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Special sits is, almost, because of the urgency and the distress that is there, very difficult to do in a 9 to 5 way. And especially then if all assets are not like, one car drive away, but all over the place, maybe in different jurisdictions with different time zones, it's pretty full on. How have you been able to sort of, deal with that? I mean, clearly you've done it very well, because you've been able to do a lot in rugby alongside with your with your professional life.
I think it comes back to, I guess, a sporting analogy around having a great team of people around you. I think definitely when I started earlier in my career and as a teenager as well, I was quite emotive as a person. I would get quite emotional. And I do definitely still feel a lot of emotion, but I definitely have that under a lot more control now than perhaps what I did when I was taking calls from angry creditors when I was in my early 20s. But having a great team of people around you is so important to us doing our jobs effectively and efficiently, and managing those crisis points as well. Some of the things that we deal with are so critical, that being able to, marshal your team to be able to assist in those matters is really important. And again, understanding people's, strengths in certain scenarios as well, being able to build your team with people that have a certain skill that will be really helpful to that particular client, or bringing someone on who has the potential to build those skills and exposing them to new opportunities. But in the same way with the rugby club, to be able to make sure that the committee is made up of a group of people that have certain skill sets to be able to assist in making sure that we're running the club efficiently, that we're challenging the financial statements, that we know that we can continue as a going concern. Because I don't know, I think most people who don't know anything about rugby know that it's not a profitable sport. It's really difficult to keep your head.
We've had our fair shares of financial distress in the UK. A couple of professional teams have not made it, which makes it even more difficult for the people that are in the profession, especially youngsters coming up, because
Exactly.
it's crowded. There's not that many spots available.
Yeah. So yeah, I think sort of team structure and makeup is quite critical across both of those things.
Yeah. So if you look at, the professional special sits, be it a lawyer or be it, a financial advisor or an accountant, what do you think are, some of the characteristics that make you, have longevity in the space, and what is it that you should avoid? Are there, trades that you need to have in order to, master the trade better? What are your thoughts on that, having, been around for a while and seeing different environments?
I think what we talked about before in respect of being able to take the emotion out of it. Sometimes you're dealing, it might be complex family disputes. It might be something emotive going on, and being able to make sure that you don't get sucked into that sort of vacuum, and keep yourself impartial is extremely important. And being able to stay objective. I mean, that's what we need to do in our role. We're not generally acting for any one person. We're generally acting for a body of people, and we need to make sure everybody's interests are looked after, and not just get blinkered by anything. I think clear communication is extremely important as well. Being able to communicate well with people, I think, is important in our field. Obviously, lawyers can be quite good at that when, some of their advocacy skills in court are exceptional. But then also there are some lawyers that love to write 20-page letters for the sake of writing 20-page letters, which doesn't help anybody, let alone their client that's having to pay the bill. So, I think, a robust approach, but not being too long-winded, perhaps, when we're discussing items, whether it be in correspondence or verbally. I think being able to get your point across clearly is important. And I think we always refer to it as plate spinning. I think that's what we do in our profession.
Yeah.
We're constantly, it's not like some other professions or some other areas in like accounting, for example, where you're working on a project and that's all you're looking at and that's all you're doing. On any given day, I might work on 5 or 10 different jobs at once. Obviously not all
Yeah.
at the same time, but picking up certain aspects on jobs that need to be progressed, or reviewing certain things on one job and then putting that down and looking at something else. So the ability to be able to multitask is extremely important, I think, as well.
Yeah. No, understood. Maybe wanted to go back to, what we started discussing earlier on, is sort of the mentality that you need to have in order to, I guess, embrace a rescue culture in our space. It sort of comes down to your attitude towards failure, right? Does it exist, or is, failure just, an opportunity to learn and subsequently succeed? What's sort of, your vision on failure, and has that sort of, helped you in your career? Because what I've, at least learned is that you seem to learn a lot more from things that don't go as planned, because you sort of, you need to take the good things, leave the bad things, and do it better. Winning, everybody can easily do that, but you don't learn too much from it. And people that are successful, are not usually successful overnight. There's a lot that comes, until you get to the stage where, it is a success. Are there things, that you could sort of share where, some things went differently from what you expected, but actually it was a lesson learned?
Yeah. I mean, I just was thinking when you were speaking there, Richard Branson's the perfect example of exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, he had so many failures on his way to ultimate success. And I think it is very important to realize we are all human at the end of the day, and not every single thing that we decide to do is going to be absolutely perfect. There are always factors that are outside of our own control. And I think being able to like you say, learn from those mistakes and actually adapt, and then next time do something better. I don't think there's ever any true mistake unless you make the same mistake twice. If you've made a mistake and you haven't learned from it, then you're in trouble. But if you make a mistake and then you progress from that, or learn from that, or take those experiences to transform that into something else going forwards, then you've truly got something good out of it. And actually,
Yeah.
my very first boss is sort of along similar lines. I went into his office one day and I started my sentence with, "This is probably a stupid question, but," and then he cut me off and he said, "Andrea, there's no such thing as a stupid question unless you ask me twice." And I think the same applies when you're thinking about things relating to mistakes.
Yeah. If you look at your career, did you sort of set yourself goals that you wanted to achieve, and then sort of, that's how you progressed? Was there like a master plan to get where you are now, or did it, go unexpectedly so? Because you hear younger people ask you, my kids, for example, did you plan all this? Well, not really, but that is sort of how has that been with you?
I mean, apart from applying for my job at Ferrier Hodgson, people came to me about working for them, right? So
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't planned, because I didn't go out and choose those. I didn't go out and pursue those opportunities for myself. They came to me. But I think that because of how hard I have worked in my roles over the years has resulted in some of the opportunities that have helpfully come my way, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm lucky that a recruiter contacted me and offered me a job in the Caribbean, but a recruiter wouldn't have contacted me about a job in the Caribbean if I hadn't established a good reputation for myself, and hadn't been known to people in the market. Grant Thornton wouldn't have come and spoken to me about joining them and joining their firm if I was haphazard, not very well performing person in the market. My reputation and the work that I'm now known for helped lead them to me. So whilst it hasn't been a planned structured step to where I've now ended up at this point, because who knows what else is in the future, I think it's resultant of the effort that's put in along the way.
And what about mentors and people that support you? Because that's another, I guess, big question that always, comes, your way when you're in profession for a little bit longer, from younger people. Well, who were the mentors, and how did that come about? What's sort of your story there?
Yeah. There's sort of two people that I point to that have played pretty big roles in my career. One particularly, and that's Tim LeCornu. He has always championed me and has always encouraged me to be the best version of myself, and to move forward, progress, excel. And he has. Yeah, he's done an incredible job with that over the years. And, even now, we haven't worked together for nearly 5 years, but we still talk, probably every couple of months at least, if not more regularly. He's still very interested in, seeing how my career is going and how I'm doing professionally and personally. And to have someone champion you and mentor you in your specific field is like, it's just extremely important to be able to have that
And
sound.
did you ask that, because you were, you worked with him in Cayman. So when you just came out of Australia, or was it just luck?
I think it just ended up that way, because I think there wasn't a lot of that necessarily happened in Cayman, but it was when we moved to Guernsey, and we were, establishing ourselves as a new business. We were going out and meeting a lot of potential clients and sources of work. He really gave me the opportunity to put myself forward in those scenarios, instead of being the sort of, holding back and not, not letting him do all the talking instead of chiming in myself. And he really encouraged me to get better. You know, as hard as it probably is for you to believe, Peter, I wasn't that great at getting up and talking in front of people or trying to sell myself and my services to people. And he did an incredible job of, you know, enabling me, but also encouraging me to do that. So he's definitely, you know, king mentor in my eyes. And then also someone who actually was one of the people that employed me when I started at Ferrier's. His name's Todd Roberts. He's left the profession, but he's still in finance, but has left the insolvency profession. And he's just always been interested in where I've gone to and what I've sort of been doing in my life. And every time I go back to Adelaide, Todd and I always catch up for a coffee. And, you know, there's just little bits of wisdom along the way that sort of he shared with me that really inspire me. And I think he's the one that started it all off for me, because he's the one that gave me a job.
Yeah. But I also understand that, you know, your mom has been a very big inspiration for you.
Yeah.
She also always supported you a lot.
Yeah. I mean, both of my parents, I'm just a little bit emotional talking about it, but, you know, I think mum and dad have just always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do and to be the best version of myself. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but, you know, they've just always supported me. And I think, you know, the decision of a 27-year-old daughter to move halfway across the world to a Caribbean island is got to be something quite daunting for parents. But yeah, they've never ever wavered in their support for me. And, you know, they're definitely, along with my sister, and my number one fans. You know, I think I'm very lucky in some instances to have such a wonderful, supportive family, because I know not everybody has great relationships with their families, but, you know, as much as we're half a world away from each other, we're still a very, very close-knit unit of family. And, you know, we've had some pretty hard times over the last couple of years, and distance certainly makes that difficult. But I do also think one of the reasons I've managed to sort of stay away for so long is, you know, the development with technology. I could tell you right now that if COVID had have happened when I first moved to Cayman in 2010, I probably would have left and moved back to Australia. But the fact that we've got so much connectivity now, and it's so cheap and easy to stay in touch with each other, and video calls is so simple. And my 2 teenage nieces can call me whenever they want. Like, you know, I think changes in technology have really helped those of us that aren't, you know, in the same place as the rest of our family.
Well, look, for me, I can very much relate to it. Even though it's just the Netherlands and the UK, you think it's very close by. Actually, it isn't, right? Sometimes it's even better that, you know, you're further away, because then you will take the time to actually travel and stay a little bit. But if it's too close by, you always think it's so close by. But if you're actually not using it, you know, you're not together. And you know, that is, you know, my dad passed away last year, and you know, the lead up of that wasn't great, and it was just a time to reflect on, you know, what an impact it has on the lives of your parents, which, you know, unbeknownst to you, you know, if you're not there, right? And again, that support is crucially important. And, you know, for me, it's sort of an eye opener towards my kids, who are, you know, one of them is in the States. You know, where do you want to be? Luckily, as you say, technology is such that it's improved a lot. But it is important, and I think it's important also, especially in our profession, because it is so easy to, you know, assume that everything is fine because you're just blinkers on doing your work, and there's never time to any reflection. And sometimes, you know, that reflection is necessary, because, you know, if you're in the hamster wheel running, you know, you don't know. The moment you come out of the hamster wheel, you can actually look at it. You know, it's a different perspective. And sometimes you need that perspective to, you know, have longevity in you know, in the profession. So it's You've also been very active, not only in the profession, not only in rugby, but also in trade organizations along the profession. And one of the trade organizations is INSOL International. And, you're the vice, president there, soon to be the president of the organization, the second, woman that, will have that position. Again, trailblazing activities right there. What is INSOL International for you as an organization and in your practice? And I know it's not the only organization that you're part of. You're active in many organizations. IWIRC we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I think INSOL for me really became a big part of my life when I did the fellowship course. And the scary part about that was that was over 10 years ago now. And you know yourself, Peter, and I'm sure the other guests that you've had on your podcast so far very much share the sentiment around the network that you get out of the fellowship group. It's a fantastic group of people, like-minded professionals from all over the world with different experiences in, different industries as well as, jurisdictions. And there's a camaraderie there. I don't know if it's kind of PTSD because we all survived getting through the fellowship together or what it is, but after completing that, the opportunity to then, become part of some different committees. I was on the INSOL World editorial committee for a while, which was quite interesting. Been involved with the INSOL Fellows group for a while now as well, which is great. And just, I guess trying to give a bit of time to, the global body that looks after our profession. And, INSOL, it's a really interesting time for the organisation at the moment because there's been quite a bit of change in the last few years. There's a new CEO who was appointed last month after a bit of change in that space. There was a whole governance review undertaken of the structure of the board of INSOL because there were quite a high number of directors that were appointed, and I think it was difficult to progress certain items because I think we all know if we have a very big board and you need to get certain approvals done, it can be quite hard. So the rationalisation of the board has been a big project for INSOL, and there's 10 of us now as board directors, and from the whole globe of countries from Australia right around the globe, past Asia, Europe, and then right around to the east coast of the US. So it's a truly global board, which I think is fantastic to get the different perspectives from the board members on various issues. And yeah, absolutely over the moon to have been successful to get a board position, but let alone to be the vice president as well. So I'm really excited about the next few years for myself, as well as in the role of president and vice president. Alistair Beveridge is doing a great job of steering the ship at the moment, and he's very focused on making sure that I'm going to be, taking the reins in a really good position. We've done a really big deep dive into our financials, and we've done a really good look at some cost cutting. Again, there was a lot of things that were just done because
financial distress. Beautiful.
Well, okay, I'm by no means saying that INSOL is in financial distress, but there's a lot of things that were done historically, and when someone comes in and starts asking questions, well, why do we do that? Oh, look, we can stop doing that and we save this money. But then also I've led a project to have a look at the revenue streams that we have as an organisation. This is terrible, but our membership fees haven't changed in 10 years. Why? There's a whole lot of things.
That's why everybody loves INSOL. It's the only organization where the price stays the same. Everything else, goes up and up and up, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's always more.
Yeah. So we have a commercial review committee that I'm sort of heading up, and we've had a bit of a deep dive into our income streams and come up with some suggestions and considerations to look at how we might increase more revenue as an organisation. And we just really being able to try and look at some of those items and align it with our strategic vision for 2030. It's all, like I say, a very interesting time, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, Well, look, it'd be great, and obviously it's going to have an impact on the practice, but in a good way, because you're right in the middle of where things happen. And I guess it's also coordination with other organizations, and yeah, you're now in a large organization. Grant Thornton is very interesting, I think, because if you look at the big four, they almost all of them have the restructuring teams have spun out. But Grant Thornton and a number of others that are not in the big four, but have become, almost as big as the big four, have stayed on with restructuring. How is that in day-to-day practice for you? Because obviously one of the big reasons for the spin-outs of the restructuring was the conflicts and what you have. Do you see the difference? Because you've been in the smaller shops yourself. Now you're in a big organization. It provides a network, but probably also some, obstacles to overcome.
Absolutely. And, being part of a global member firm like Grant Thornton does, throw up a few spanners in the works sometimes when we're looking at potential client work. But, we have a number of robust safeguards in place in relation to that. And, there's international conflict checks that get done to make sure that we eliminate any risk of any self-review threats and things like that. I think that there is... I think it's really helpful to have other practice areas within the business. Tax, for example, is extremely relevant for a number of considerations for our projects and the things that we look at in our space. So to be able to walk across the floor to my tax colleagues and have a conversation with them about something is extremely helpful, because I in no way even pretend to know much about tax at all. So, having a multi-service firm to be able to help service needs for clients is extremely helpful. And we will never take on liquidations, contentious or insolvent liquidations that we've had any audit involvement with. That's just a complete, absolute non-starter. So, we eliminate the threat of self-review by having a lot of robust controls and checks in place.
And what is your view or the firm's view on being a larger player in the market worldwide, and looking at the geopolitics that we're in these days? Is it the case that we should just be neutral, independent, and focus and stay in our lane, and look at the substance? Or are there other ways of, influencing geopolitics in a way that is actually good for our profession? It's maybe also one for, INSOL as an organization. I feel like geopolitics has always been there, but the impact that it seems to have on our practice, is probably bigger than it ever was before. And maybe, you touched upon it earlier as well. Sanctions, for example, huge impact on our practice. Sometimes good, but also sometimes extremely difficult to deal with. Do you have any views on that? Because that's one of the issues that I think everybody is wrestling with these days.
Yeah, I think, the Russia-Ukraine war has obviously put a huge spotlight on that for us most recently. There are so many structures that are completely hamstrung at the moment with being able to deal with assets, or, there's a complete lack of liquidity. There's a lot of issues for people around these structures that are kind of almost orphaned in a way, because nobody is able to act on them without getting, and some people may just take the view they can't act at all, they don't have the risk appetite to do it. Then other people will perhaps take on the work, but then there's certain licenses that need to be obtained. And these things all cost quite a lot of money to obtain. And I think, I'm not by all means saying, cancel all the sanctions and let's, try and resolve all of this. But, it definitely causes a lot of contention around certain work that we can and can't do. And I think, that perhaps there's a bigger role for some regulators to take in some of this space. And like you say, the politics and the impact of it. all I hear about when I was in the US the other week was about the tariffs, and Trump and all these tariffs that he brings in and then takes away and then increases and then decreases, and 200% tax on this, tariff on this, and it's just how businesses manage to survive in such volatile environments at the moment really is, quite astounding in some ways, because there's so many risks and so many uncertainties out there.
Yeah. Obviously, that's our business, to deal with risks, but yeah, the unpredictability level of the risks is a lot higher, it seems, these days. So yeah, definitely, and yeah, maybe that is something that, as an organization, INSOL International, is maybe easier to do something about that than when you're in, an organization like Grant Thornton, where you need to stay in your lane and be independent. It's interesting how that is going to play out. So if you look back at the 20 odd years that you've now been in special sits, what do you think is the biggest change that you have experienced? I mean, we've seen many changes, right? The world has changed. It's come faster, more technology, more cross-border. One of the things that I feel is a big difference is also that the role of the banks has changed. It's now distressed investors. But what is it in your neck of the wood? Because it seems like, as we've said, it's there's a different focus for offshore.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, I think when we spoke earlier, we talked about the regulatory change and the regulatory environment, and I think that's definitely been one of the big changes in the environment, and that dictates a lot around the type of clients that want to come and do business in our jurisdiction as well. I think tighter regulation means that perhaps less nefarious people are able to have structures and invest than perhaps were 20, 30 years ago. And yeah, I think particularly in the Channel Islands, there's definitely been a lot of work done and education in the courts in relation to the role that we undertake. Guernsey, for example, now has a specific commercial division in its court, which it didn't have before. So if we were going to court for a winding up application, we may have to sit through a liquor licensing application and a planning approval permission to then sit in front of the same judge that listened to both of those to consider commercial matters. So I think that's a positive development. We now have a specific commercial court that sits specifically on commercial matters, and you have the more commercially minded judges that perhaps have worked in industry before sitting on those matters rather than custody matters, property matters, and liquor licensing matters.
And is that also a change in your focus and practice? Because I saw that you're a full examiner, but you're also recently become like an expert witness as well. Is that part and parcel of the change that and you're active in in certain commissions that are doing review of the insolvency rules? It's a trend that there is more regulation, and therefore that part of the business is going to be more prominent.
Yeah. So we've introduced insolvency rules in Guernsey, just to help out with procedure and essentially streamline expectations around advertising, creditors meetings, proof of debts, those sorts of things, because there was a real lack of procedural direction in those areas. So that's been a positive development in that space. Jersey's also had some legislative changes over the past few years. Up until recently, if you issued a statutory demand against a company in Jersey and they didn't comply, you could apply to the court for their winding up. But what's called the Viscount, which is an equivalent to an official receiver, would be appointed to be the liquidator. So creditors couldn't nominate a liquidator to be appointed. So that rule has changed now in Jersey to allow creditors to nominate insolvency practitioners themselves rather than it defaulting to the Viscount. And they've also introduced a provisional liquidation regime, which hadn't been done before in Jersey. And Jersey also doesn't have an administration regime, but they're currently in discussions about introducing administration in Jersey as well. So, it's been really positive legislative developments across the islands as well, which I think provides more help to creditors in insolvent situations.
Yeah. So if we're sort of taking stock of where we are and we look into the crystal ball going forward, what do you think is coming down the pike? Everybody obviously, has a view or no view or is considering what AI is going to do. Be interested to know if there's any specific thoughts you have on it. I think a lot of people are just, on the fence still as to what exactly it's going to do. And maybe it's going to do more for the generations that are still to come than it is for us. But, we can't ignore it. But are there other things that you think are coming down the pike in our space that we should be aware of?
I mean, AI is an interesting one, and I think the discussion around that at the moment is, it's going to replace people doing jobs, and I don't think that that's necessarily the right way to look at it. I think that it will change the way that we do our jobs. It will change the development of graduates and new people into the profession. It will change the way that they learn and the way that they develop their skills, but it's not going to eliminate, say, the administrator to manager level of staff, because people aren't going to be coming out of university and being able to walk in straight as a manager, right? So there's still got to be that evolution and development of people in their knowledge, understanding and concepts. I think it will just be different. It's not going to be, there may be some, rationalization of workforce in certain areas, but I think it's just going to change the way we do things, in the same way that email revolutionized the world, in the same way that the internet has done that as well. It's not completely going to be killing off certain, levels or of staffing, but it's going to change the way that we do business. It's going to change the way that we learn. It's going to change the way that we do our jobs.
Yeah. But is it already, I mean, we're going to have pretty soon a webinar about it. What does AI do in your practice? Is it something that is a big focus within Grant Thornton to sort of, have your own AI? And has it already resulted in, I guess, the treatment of juniors in a different way?
I wouldn't say yet. I think we're still exploring what we may or may not what we may introduce into the business. We've had a lot of people talking about Copilot, for example, and how that would be helpful in assisting our business, and we're looking at how that might integrate and help us with things. But at the moment, for our Channel Islands firm, we definitely haven't sort of rolled out any new particular utilization of AI tools at this point, but it is something that we're becoming more aware of and looking at for some of our bigger projects in the forensic accounting space, because there's got to be a lot of work that can be streamlined and hours minimized by some of the work that could be done by an AI tool.
Yeah. And do you think that we're in our profession going to move towards more harmonized laws substantively in our field, or do you think that we're actually moving away from that and a more fierce competition between jurisdictions to get, I guess, the work that is out there, the cross-border work, get it into your jurisdiction? I mean, obviously historically it's the UK and the US, but Singapore is there. Offshore have their own way of attracting things. What's your view on that part of the business going forward?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I've studied about and, looked at the model law, but it's not something that we use in the Channel Islands at all. But I think that the concepts that are set out therein and the use of that across a number of different jurisdictions has proven extremely helpful for, cross-border restructuring and insolvency scenarios. So, consideration around whether there might be further adoption of the model law in jurisdictions across the world to further facilitate and help develop that further is something for consideration, I think.
But it hasn't hampered the business, in the Channel Islands and offshore not having it at the moment.
No, not at all. And I think, we have remedies available to be able to send letters of request to the UK court, for example. We have say, for example, one of my big cases in Guernsey is a holding company with a number of European subsidiaries. We have a lot going on in France, for example, and the court was more than happy to accept the fact that we're validly appointed in Guernsey, with a copy of our court order. Other jurisdictions would like us to formally apply for recognition under the Guernsey proceedings through the court process. So it's just a matter of understanding what each jurisdiction requires. But obviously that can be much more streamlined if there's a model law being used.
Yeah, understood. When you first came to the Cayman Islands and sort of started at Krys Global, you mentioned Fairfield Sentry as like a big case that you worked on. Is that, would you say, one of the biggest cases you've worked on? Are there other cases that you've worked on that, are in your profession, your development in the profession significant? And what is it that these cases have actually sort of, provided in terms of lessons learned? Fairfield Sentry in particular, I think had many aspects. I think one thing that I recently discussed with my two sons was the huge impact that, a Ponzi scheme has on, quote unquote, the victims. Is not just, the managers that have money in there, but it could be, people have all their pension funds in there and they're gone. Everything that you've built up 30 years is gone. So it has a huge impact on you. And then, the fact that some people were paid, others were not paid. And therefore, is it appropriate to get some assets that were paid back into the pool to share with others? The clawback actions, that becomes a lot more, I guess, things you can understand if you understand what it is that the victims actually are faced with. Because if you're just lucky you were paid by the Ponzi scheme, you're happy as Larry. But if you're not paid, you've lost everything. Is that fair? And how long can you then claw back things? I know that Fairfield Sentry in particular was a case where that was explored extensively.
Yeah, and that was a lot of the work that I was doing on that was in relation to the clawback claims. And I think it was a very interesting consideration, just because someone managed to put in a redemption 2 days, and got paid out 2 days before everything unraveled. Why should they be in a better position than someone that didn't request their money back?
Or 5 months ago or a year ago.
Or even a year ago.
You've benefited from, your quote unquote unjustified enriched.
Yeah, unjustly enriched.
How far does that go?
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's a big issue to navigate for sure, and a very interesting one. And there's been plenty of case law throughout a number of issues looked at on Fairfield over the years. It's probably definitely the most famous one that I've worked on. And me and a colleague found it quite funny when there was a Netflix series about Madoff, I think, 6-part miniseries. And it was just really funny watching one of those documentaries, because we all sit down and watch different documentaries, don't we? But hearing a lot of names that, mean so much to us because we were in the nitty gritty of it for a while. So, but yeah, I was involved, in a deceased estate, where this was also a Ponzi scheme, where an individual had set up an investment fund. So he was a retired chartered accountant, and he was a bit of a pillar of the community, and he was involved with the church, and he had very good standing, and he was running this investment fund. He unfortunately died in a car accident, and then people started sending letters and sending emails asking for their money. And turns out there was no money because there was no investment fund, and he'd essentially been operating a Ponzi scheme. And it was extremely personal for a number of people, because it's their pensions. It was the money that they were putting aside to build a new home. It was their life savings, all of that sort of a thing. And a very emotionally charged creditors meeting was held in relation to that one. But the impact that some of these fraudsters have on unwitting participants is very, very sad to see firsthand sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think another, issue offshore that may not have, had a lot of effect in in the Channel Islands was obviously also the letterbox companies, and to what extent the comey can ever be there or not. That has, over time resolved itself. But is that something that you have come across in your practice a lot or not?
Yeah, not particularly. There was obviously the Panama Papers scandal. There was a bit of fallout from that touched the Channel Islands, but not in a particularly major way. But yeah, I think the whole issue around kind of comes back to the tax point as well. Making sure that if companies are Guernsey registered, there's a certain level of substance that needs to exist in Guernsey for it to take advantage of, the low tax rate or whatever it might be. And again, that's another, higher level of regulation that's come in recent years to make sure and try and minimize the risk of people taking advantage of setting up in one country, and actually running the operations in another, and avoiding tax, for example.
And is AML, anti-money laundering, because you're also doing reviews for the regulator, so that's also part of the practice. It is prevention, as well as dealing with the consequences when it goes wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's a big part of your practice as well.
Yeah, I think it's a big part of our practice insofar as I get probably like a lot of people, it's frustrating sometimes the amount of time it takes to take on a client, because of the relevant requirements around AML. We do consult in relation to AML compliance work in certain situations, and we have worked on remediation exercises for clients, to be able to help them perhaps sort out some of their client book that's less than optimal in the AML space.
Yeah. Okay. One question that is also very, topical these days is, why are you doing what you're doing? Is there a why for you to be in this practice? I will tell you that, when my kids initially asked me that question, there wasn't a why that I could think of initially, but over time, you can come up with why you're doing things, because, there are reasons why you enjoy it. Is there a specific why for you?
Yeah, I think it's because I feel like I can help people. And sometimes it might not be a fantastic result. Sometimes it might not work out as well as we might hope. But I feel like what I do helps people. It contributes to maybe righting a wrong. It helps with people to be able to perhaps draw a line in the sand and move on with their life after a bad investment or whatever it might be. But I do genuinely feel that the why for me is because it helps people.
And would you also use that, yardstick to measure whether or not an engagement in special sits is successful? Is there a definition for what is success in special sits?
I don't think there is a hard and fast definition because every special sit is different, right? So what is considered success for me in one job might not be considered success for you in another job. So I don't think there's any golden rule or line for success.
And that hasn't also, has that changed, or has it been, as uncertain as it was when you started as it is now?
I think, I think it's as uncertain as it is, 23 years ago. I think it's still just as uncertain now.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because I think initially it was sort of, trying to get as much money as fast as possible so you can, have some recovery is one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But obviously, depending on, how you actually came into the situation, especially with distressed investors coming in at a discount, then, your concept of what success is completely changes because, you don't need to have a recovery of 100%. If you have much less, it still is a change. And then again, if you don't have an appetite to take equity, then obviously, how do you restructure things moving forwards? So I think it has become a lot more complex as far as I'm concerned what success is, and it depends very much on where you're acting. And I think your definition is probably a very good one. Is if you've been able to help somebody with a problem, then that is a success, regardless of what the outcome is. If it has actually helped, then that I can see that. I think that we've covered quite a bit. One of the sort of last questions that I would pose to you for the younger people that maybe look at this and think of maybe a career in this space. Is there any specific advice that you would have for them? And maybe in particular, maybe, other women that think, hey, I could do that as well. Is there any specific advice that you would give them?
I just think, like with an open mind, I think you can achieve a lot of good things. And I think that, yes, you probably need to be a bit creative. You need to, but not in the artistic way, because I'm definitely not artistically creative. But with your mindset, to be creative and open minded in approaches to things, and you sort of need to be a bit of a sponge as well and learn from your colleagues around experience that they've had in the past, and listening and learning from other people. I think has been extremely important to me in my career so far. I said before, it's not for everybody. I think one of the great things about working at a bigger firm is that we have people from different departments will come, oh, can I find out more about what you do? And they might come and do a secondment in our department for a while. And some of them stay, which is really nice because they learn about it, they find it fascinating and they want to stay. But other people, find it a bit confronting. Some people find it quite aggressive. So, it's not for everybody. So, also, don't be too disappointed if it's not for you. If you give it a go, because you've got other accounting careers or other areas that you can look at and move into. But I also, you asked the question before about mentors and sponsors, and I think that is a big key to being successful in any field as well, is making sure you have a good person to bounce ideas off of, or to have a conversation with when you're feeling very inferior, or you're feeling disheartened about something, because however you're feeling about something probably means that somebody before you has felt the same way, and to be able to share your experiences and stories really helps you develop into a good practitioner.
Yeah. And your move to leave Australia and go, abroad, did you feel that there was a disconnect culturally that you sort of, found in the Caymans or in the Channel Islands, or, even in, I guess, an international organization like Grant Thornton, where you're dealing with people in various jurisdictions with various backgrounds? Is that something that, you believe was an issue, or has it actually more enriched your career by doing that?
It's definitely enriched my career. And I think, again, like the whole being a bit of a sponge, and if you're arriving into a new environment, taking it all in, listening and learning from people and things, I think, there, in my mind, and I know it's a bit biased because I'm someone that has moved and lived in a few different places, but I think there's so much that can be gained for individuals from travel and trying, a few years in a different jurisdiction. My mindset when I first left was similar to when I moved to Guernsey. What's the worst that can happen? I go back and I get another job, and I think sometimes the benefits that you can get out of taking these risks far outweigh, the downside if perhaps something doesn't work out. But I just think I feel I definitely am, more enriched and more culturally aware from my travels and my living in different countries and dealing with different cultures. And particularly Guernsey, it's just, across the sea from England. It's, probably not that culturally diverse in some people's eyes, but it really is. There's a number of different nationalities that live here that call Guernsey home now. And then there's, the traditional culture in Guernsey as well of, the history right back to when the Normans occupied the islands. So there is a lot of history. There's a lot of culture to take away from that. And I think that that's definitely added positively to my life.
So have you, come up with a life philosophy for yourself based on the career that you've had so far?
That's a tough question, Peter. I might have to think about that and come back to you another time.
That's beautiful. That's
Yeah,
beautiful. That
I
we
just,
ensure that there is another conversation to be had.
no, I just think it's really silly, but I just have a mantra for myself, like, just don't be an idiot, like, just don't be an idiot, like, be considered, think about what you're doing. And that's professionally and personally, I think, just be a nice human, and I think that can help in so many different circumstances.
I think that's a beautiful way of landing the plane. Andrea, thank you very much for your time. I thought it was, a great conversation. I'm very grateful that you took the time.
Thanks, Peter. It's lovely to speak.
Great.